been with the SOC Summit for the last couple of years, and the main focus I missed last year, and then I retired from the military and let my hair grow out. And so a lot of people that I had met over the last couple of years are like, I don't know you, but okay, cool. So we go through this process of transformation, and we're really right at the moment of a transformation, right? And how do you start to go at hacking that piece of that transformation that you're going through? And SOC automation and orchestration is there. I got lucky. A friend of mine introduced me to Phantom, and that product came out, and we were just like, okay, that's awesome. I need to get on board with that. And I started out with being employee number 52. We grew up to 108, and then that transitioned into the Splunk iteration and going down that road. So we're going to talk about a little bit of SOAR history, which includes security operations, and maybe somebody will throw tomatoes at me. It'll be a good day. And then where we're going in the future, what is SOEL, which is not the awesome thing that Alyssa talked about, but more of about how we manage the process and how we go through security operations. And then, are you a SOAR loser, hacking SOEL, and then any cute questions and answers that you may have. So when we go into what I want you to have for key takeaways is I want you to try to understand the difference between the two processes, because I've been consulting in this process. I'm a professional services guy. So I'll go in and help you get implemented when you start going through this. And a lot of the things that we get from the customers is like, well, I don't have any formal processes. That's okay. I don't need formal processes. As a matter of fact, at this point, I'm pretty much preferred not even to start with them. They're great reference material, but I'm going to show you examples of why we want to be able to change that mindset and go differently. So then we want to understand how that impacts and how the SOEL impacts your SOAR development and moving that forward. And then lastly, using the SOEL to actually drive your SOAR program and make sure it's effective. So when we talk about the history, right, we're going back to the things that we used to do and how we progress forward, from network operations to enterprise operations. When we first started realizing that we needed to manage our networks and get the systems up and running and monitor those critical systems, you don't have to raise your hand, but I'm sure plenty of you have used WhatsUp Gold in your early days to make sure your servers were up and running. To you move to enterprise operations where you start managing those business applications, and that's about the same time that you start integrating your security products through your environment and start managing your security engineering process. And then from there, it's a pivotal point where the company starts to make a transition between just doing enterprise operations to going into security operations and pivoting. In 2006, I was doing a full network security operations center, 24/7, patching over 18,000 systems over an 800-bit network over satellite links and patching them to 97% effectiveness in 2 weeks as part of a security operation. So when you want to do it right, you need to have the leadership, and that's really the key, right? And that's really where the transition from the Cyber Operations Center is going to come from. It's going to come from the SOC and the senior leadership to drive that. It's not a technical problem, it's a leadership problem. And that's really going to drive where you start feeding that into our next evolution, is where we start fusing more with the business and actually becoming integrated with the risk program, more so than just, because can we stop all the threats? Can we truly stop every threat that hits the environment? That's what the CISO is there for, is to take that risk, right? And obviously, you know, from the different breaches, some CISOs take a huge hit. Others don't take much of one. It just really depends on kind of how the media plays it up and what they're actually doing to be effective, and did they really make a big mistake and they gambled on a risk that they couldn't take. So we know the security operations problem is really tied about resources and tying all the products together. Every SOC is special. Every SOC is different. They're all special snowflakes every single time. I've run into a different SOC. It's a different tool, different capabilities, different matrix, different process. What I'm trying to get you guys to see is that they're not all that different. They're relatively the same. The key is getting us to work together to try and define what is going to be the standard process for everybody and starting to move down that road. Because we really need to move to speed. Because if we move to speed, then we can reduce costs, And that's how we're going to get more availability of our resources, because every time I run into a team, everybody wants to be a ninja. When it was pen testing was all the rage, everybody wanted to be a pen tester. Now everybody wants to be a hunter, right? So anything that's cool and awesome that looks like Fortnite, we want to do it, right? That's really where we're going. So, and for me, I always wanted to be a pilot, right? I was an Army guy. I jumped out of airplanes, but I always wanted to be a pilot. I mean, I even got up and presented to 4-star generals trying to get the whole Top Gun reference in place while I was having my conversation. So now I've done it twice so that people can see it. The idea is that this concept that Phantom came out with was called SOAR. It's defined by the OODA loop, which is the observe, orient, decide, and act. And really what we're trying to get to is to observe what the enemy's doing, orient ourselves to them, and then basically make a decision and act. And what John Boyd came up with as the father of the modern F-16 and the tactics that tied to that is he came up with this process of, okay, if you make your decision faster, you get to go home. The other guy gets to go in the ocean. And that was really a basis of all these ACEs, all the way going back to World War II going forward, all the way through Korea and Vietnam, is that these ACEs could make their decisions faster than their adversary. And it was all about aligning and being able to make that decision. So in 2012, I started to do some cool things in an environment, and what I learned is that in a SOC, you have to learn when to make that decision, when to observe, how do you get your orientation, and then make that decision and act on that. It wasn't until I made that, till our teams started making those decisions, that we actually could stop the adversary in his tracks. Because we knew where he was going next, we knew what he was doing, but if we're in the model of playing whack-a-mole, then we're going to continually play that game and keep whacking moles until we're done. And it's a lot of, you're here. So I'll tell you, if you're here, go home and tell yourself you're never going to play whack-a-mole again, that you're going to want to do containment, right? Because it's a frustrating game to know you're never going to win. Because has anybody ever won whack-a-mole? Anybody? Oh, you've won it? Ha. I knew you would win it, Chris. So what's SOEL? Security Operations Event Lifecycle. General basis of processes that go into your environment generally stay consistently the same. You have an ingestion or some kind of alert process. You have an external validation, whether you're using some threat intelligence or maybe you're using a threat feed. It doesn't really matter what it is. Virus total, threat connect, it doesn't matter. But what you want is another validation. Your SIM fired an alert or SIEM fired alert, and you want another validation to make sure that alert is correct, right? You're going from that qualification process. Then you're going to internal hunting, right? You need to scope that threat event and go through that process to find the range, right? Depending on your maturity, depends on how far you can scope that rabbit hole. Because you can go way down that rabbit hole into a whole different world if even just doing the simple thing is processing a fish, right? You're going to make some change, but that's going to require some monitoring. Maybe you're going to monitor first and then make a change. It really depends on what kind of team you have and where your maturity is. But then you're going to need to run some jobs, whether it's go to a sandbox, whether it's run some forensics, and then lastly, you need to start doing some notifications on those pieces, right? Who do you need to notify? Who do you need to document for tickets and whatnot? So then this is really how this all ties in, because time communication equals impact. What's the SOC for? Can anybody give me a simple sentence of what the SOC is there for the CISO? Anybody? Say again? Identify threats. Situational awareness. Anybody else? Ismail? Risk management. Okay, yes. So there's something about risk management, reducing of threats, identifying threats. You want to know what the SOC is there for? I'm going to tell you right now. You all would be out of a job if you could stop ransomware today. Right? If you could stop ransomware today with one kill of the switch, you would be there. Because it's about impact. What part of the risk equation do we affect? We affect impact. An incident responder's whole focus on the planet is to stop that threat as fast as humanly possible. The question will be is, how fast are you enabling them to do that task? I've been doing security operations for about 16 years, and it started out with 6 screens across my desk and a bunch of windows and things all thrown up there. And then as it's evolved, now I go walking into new modern SOCs. I still have 6 screens, but I got email over here, I got 50 tabs here, 50 tabs here, 4 tabs there, and 6 tabs here, and one of them is a ticketing tool somewhere, right? But the idea is getting to the response, right? We got to get to that response. We've got to get to that blocking mechanism. So some of the things that we want to talk about is, you heard Chris talk about some of the things that he teaches in his process. Well, I took the Management 517 class, and I've kind of embodied some of the things that he taught me through that course. I learned some things that I thought I already knew, and then I was like, okay, there's some really cool, awesome things out of that class that you could pull out that we were reusing. And one of those is being able to understand your inputs and your artifacts, right? And then through these standard procedures, you can see I'm starting to already build and identify these typical use cases for a customer of how to do that process. Right? And then I start going in and picking after these different pieces because I want to refrain on what kind of actions I need and what kind of artifacts I want, right? So are you a SOAR loser? By show of hands, how many people are using a SOAR product in today full production? Maybe 3 or 4, okay? I don't want you to be a SOAR loser. I don't want you to think you're missing out because this is for everybody, from the 2-man SOC to a 1,000-man SOC. Because I can tell you, an MSSP isn't productive if they can't automate some stuff, right? They're just not going to make enough money doing it. There's no way they can. And those MSSPs that I've learned about and that I've worked with at points in time have either rolled their own capabilities or done something to get that automation process as quickly and as fast as possible, down to sending that email to you so that you can go run around creating your own tickets to solve that same problem. So a lot of times we get customers that tell us, well, automation and orchestration is no difference. They're the same. I want to challenge you to think differently. Orchestration is like making music. I want this group to do this, I want this group to do this, and I want that group to do that, right? Nobody really knows who's doing what, but in each one of those groups, everybody's singing a different tune, they're singing different lyrics, they're going through the process. Security automation is like a bread maker, right? I can make lots of bread, pizza bread, loaf of bread, sourdough, but I'm still making bread, right? That's the basis of it, right? And then really the response process of this SOAR is to get you to automation, to get you to start stopping the impacts. It's the one thing, though, that most customers stop doing. They want get me all the data. Bring me all the data so I can see all the data. But they're not stopping the process. And what we want to get you to is stopping that process and going into the process of going and evaluating what information you need and making a decision and acting on it. Whether you're a 0-tier SOC where you got rock stars, or level 2, level 3 like kind of individuals, and you outsource your senior incident response, or you're a fully tiered security operation and you got 24/7 operations, the object is to minimize the impact on the analyst and get there, right? One of the things that I found is pretty funny is that how many former IT folks here? Show of hands. Okay. How many pure security folks that like ticketing systems? Anyone? Well, you have something in common with your former IT bubbas. They hated their ticketing systems too, right? But we still haven't learned that we still hate them, so we still want to make it manual, right? And we force that process. And maybe we automate some of that by some simple automation to get that ticket into, or get that information into in a base ticket. But we need to do that faster. Same thing with our contextualization or asking the same queries. I go into too many environments where I see level 1s and level 2s in the same doing their own queries. And I just scratch my head. Because what you want is, you want those base queries and them running them and getting that information back to you. Because you need to be able to make those decisions, right? Me and Ismail worked at a customer site, And we spent 6 months teaching the team to run an automation process and a tool he used called Rostrador that basically goes out and gets triage information so that the analyst was literally going through the triage information while he was doing the investigation, because we all want that triage information just in time. So what makes a good orchestra? What makes good music, right? You're looking at some kind of automation platform, right? How do you get those APIs integrated into that environment? You're looking for some kind of workflow orchestration, right? You want to be able to make decisions. You also want that man in the middle or human in the middle collaboration. It's about machine teaming, right? You're going to be Tony Stark. You're getting the Iron Man suit, right? Tony Stark wasn't any dumber by donning the suit. He just got the information in his HUD right there, and Jarvis was telling him to make a decision on what data. So he's making decisions and acting accordingly, right? So where do you start? The idea of starting through this process for us is understanding that we need something that commonalizes everything from top to bottom. And a fractal does that. So me and a group of my team, or a group of my old team and some friends started thinking about this particular problem and how do we solve this problem, because I don't want to go into another environment, or at least I would like to have you guys already have a fresh start of understanding how to solve the problem. And it's all too often we go into a customer environment and they're always the same. They always think their environment is special. How many of you do file analysis? Good portion of you, right? URL analysis, domain analysis, IP analysis. You all do those same processes. We can automate those. We don't have to do them manually, right? You all create tickets or use some kind of ticketing tool, right? Whether it's a tool that actually does case management for you or it's a tool that you add to it. You heard other people talk about understanding and discovering your best business practices, right? What does the business need or want in order to survive? Because from that, that's where you're going to start scoping. What tier assets are you using? How are you categorizing your environment? And this all starts to lead out into the first understanding of where your environment is going. Understanding where your zones are, right? We went into this, using this case study and an example, we went into this environment and we set up this case study, and what we found is that we had 5 CCIE engineers on staff, but the environment was too immature to do segmentation. Except for when we threw IDSs at every gateway. Then we had segmentation. Because we had 29 hospitals tied together, and we just basically isolated each hospital so that we wouldn't have a ransomware event. And it's one of the few hospitals that I know of in doing breach response that hasn't had a significant event like that. And I actually responded to a couple of them in the last couple of years. We want to be able to turn those pieces into a monitoring capability and alert on them, right? Because we need to know what's going on. And some things we're going to monitor, right? We want to open the door and monitor those pieces, right? And it doesn't matter how you monitor, when you monitor, but you're going to monitor some stuff, right? Whether you use the attack model to build some of your use case scenarios and monitor down that piece. Then you want to get to response. But once you realize you're responding and your time to remediate is based on when the IT guys actually get out to that laptop or that desktop and actually yank it offline or replace it with a new clean system. In 2000, I hanker back to 2006 because we're still back there in a lot of ways in some organizations, but it's 2018 now, right? In 2006, I had a site that was re-imaging 300 machines a day to solve a technical problem that they could have solved if they just fixed their image, right? So the idea is that we want to be able to speed that response, and sometimes we can make it manual. If we got enough bodies to throw at a problem, right, we can solve part of it, but we don't have that. That's one of our restrictions. So we have to automate. Right? And that automation starts to lead to we need to share that information, whether it's between different products, different people, different teams, right? automation isn't just for, or SOAR isn't just for security, it's going to end up being for the entire environment, right? You're seeing scalability in the Azure cloud, you're seeing scalability in AWS cloud environments, where if you only have to manage one gold image and you have 50,000 machines, it's a whole different problem to attack and patch. You have to measure. It doesn't matter where you are in the process, you have to measure what it is. Whether it's time to detect, time to respond, time to contain, time to recover, time it takes for you to get your lessons learned back into the process. Because you have to be able to transform. If you don't measure it, how do you transform your environment? How do you create those new changes? This is the fractal we're talking about. Discover, monitor, respond, automate, measure, and transform. This, in essence, is TTP0, which is something that we built as a team that we'll preview tomorrow for you, and it has its own content and site. So I spent a good time on that, and now I'm going to tell you about hacking your soul. Because, well, we really want to understand the problem that we have with the SOAR environments and helping modernize your SOCs. Because you need to get forward for that. You need to be able to try harder. And what's the 10% that you gave this week to help push the bar on your SOC to make it a little bit better? And everybody has to give that little bit. So first thing, let's separate the difference between use cases and playbooks, right? And the understanding is that the machine and the human processing are completely and utterly different. How many of us, and you don't have to show your hands, but I know we all love to look at the body of the email and process that email, right? And look at the Nigerian prince that left us, a healthy inheritance, so that all we have to do is send him an email and he'll send us our money, right? But the other process is that the machine is analytically consistent and significantly faster. You don't have to look at our product, look at any SOAR product. And they'll all tell you that they'll enhance your capability to process things significantly just if you kind of start going through the process, whether it's taking on that SOAR phishing use case, which is like the go-to use case, which for me is the worst use case to take on, because it's literally every component of an investigation and can go down every rabbit hole if you do it right. To understanding the human is effectively better, right, than the machine is at making a decision and making an understanding. But the problem is the experience and the process to get them there, and generally it's not efficient. Because they'll move around, they'll look at different data, they'll squirrel at the shiny thing over here, they'll kind of dig around in their SIM for a bit, and then they'll come back and go, oh yeah, that's a false positive, we'll just move on. Or that's a positive, and now I'm going to kick it up to level 2. So I pulled this from Chris's, one of the things that I pulled heavily from Chris was on the 517 was the input, interaction, actions, and artifacts, and coming to a modern playbook methodology. Because use cases are for the SIM, in my personal opinion. Because the idea is that if we're going to use use cases and we're going to build use cases, my SOAR platform is going to look like every SIM. And those of you that have used QRadar, sorry, Craig, have 9,000 offenses. I'm lazy. I'm not creating 9,000 playbooks for you. Okay? So then that comes on you, right? So we've got to figure out how to manage these input and artifacts, and we need to understand the interactions and actions between them. And then we need to modernize our playbooks to kind of go feed into that runbook methodology of, hey, I need to ingest alerts, create tickets, create evidence, gather evidence, notify the IR team, create a run job for the forensics team, scope an event by asking a few poignant questions and kind of narrow things in. Because the goal, again, right, for me, is to SOAR, which means to get into that OODA loop and make that decision in action. So the utopian Rob that wants to do SOAR in your environment is going to come in and consult you that I need the analyst to decide and act. Because I want to streamline the interface between the input that comes in and the input goes out. Because I don't know about any of you, but I've made my fair share of mistakes. I've put it in an IP address that I shouldn't have, put it on the firewall, and watch everybody scream for 20 minutes while I'm scrambling to take it off, right? Or in other customers, we have one customer that basically declined to use our tool because they put a hash in Carbon Black, and they had a production outage across their environment. And now they're going to do manual review only and manual operations because automation is too much for them. But as you can see here, we started going down those use cases and putting all these use cases in and started going through, and then the next minute I know I need to make a playbook for botnet detection. I need to make vulnerability management postures. I need to get centralized situational awareness dashboards created. I need to understand how the spam is coming from external and ingest all these emails. Part out the threat intelligence and feed that into your MISP platform. But each one of these use cases, while all of them are valid, we're not thinking about how the modularity of the platform that we're asking for. Because we're really addicted to use cases, right? Robert Palmer really does want to let you go and let you not be addicted to use cases anymore, right? Because there's no quick fix. MITRE's a great methodology, and I've been using it since 2014, plus or minus, before it was actually released, GPL. But the idea is that it's a great model, and it's going to stand the test of time. It's actually overshadowed its competitor, the kill chain, in a lot of ways, in my opinion. But the idea is that we really want to be able to solve the problem, and there isn't a solution. It's about responding. It's about acting. It's about standardizing our processes and moving those forward. So when we start talking about that, I start thinking, okay, well, I came into this program a year ago, and I need to not create 50,000 playbooks. So how do I get around this problem? Most customers have an incident response policy, but when I ask them, hey, where's your incident response plan? They look at me like, okay, well, let's build one. Let's come up with one. Let's start to feed that process, because if you have an incident response plan, then feed that to me, because I can use that as a basis to start this process. Have you done categorization? Do you understand those events? Now, this is just an example, but I stole these from my time in DoD and basically recategorized them numerically so that I could put them in a severity mode so I can numerically rate what kind of category I'm dealing with. And then there isn't a situation in the SOC that doesn't fit these categories. But then you tie that against the attack vector. Now I've got a malicious logic. It's a file. It's a process. I'm going to feed that process in, and my response mechanism only changed to host, email, web, and external. It's the same thing. I may change my process a little bit on how I respond, right? If it's a host and it's ransomware, I have a dirty word key list. I just populate my dirty word key list, and now I'm automating my quarantine process, and the analyst isn't even involved anymore. So if you could quarantine an environment, right, that hit your ransomware rule for whatever reason, and you could quarantine it in seconds, would you ever have another ransomware call? Now, that's not saying that you're going to stop all ransomware attacks, because just as soon as we get faster at detecting their new stuff or their old stuff, they build new stuff to try to get around the edge. And that still requires us to be hunting. But it would be a lot easier when I don't have to go into a SOC and tell the level 3, hey, bud, you shouldn't really be doing the ransomware investigation. You should be really hunting and looking for the next intrusion or the next dropper that dropped on your box. So when we look at starting hacking your SOEL, what we're looking at is this is your standard use case scenario for a suspicious email, right? You review that email, you start to gather, the body, you look at the header info, yep, the reply to doesn't match the to address, I got that. I'm looking, maybe I look up the X origin IP, and that comes back and tied to mail.ru or some crazy thing like that, or mail.cn, right? And then you start querying the recipients. Yep, this is bad, so I got to go get all the recipients from that email. Maybe I use a subject. Maybe I just use all the who it sent it from and just start grabbing that query. Then I start taking out the file and the URL, and I send those to the sandbox. And then I turn around and get my reputation from VirusTotal because I want to know if, did I detect this? Could I detect this? Did my tools protect me? Right? And then lastly, doing that sandbox file assessment, and then I go and remove that email out of that environment. And that's just barely scratching the surface of a phishing investigation. So when did I get to the point of doing the investigation where I was actually dealing with the maliciousness of the environment? Near the end. And what we want to do is bring that to the front, right? We want to turn around and ingest that process, bring it back in, and go right after file and URL reputation. But we want to use our capability of understanding that inputs, outputs, and artifacts, and I made like a little minor mod to Chris's thought process to kind of pull that in, right? And then go through that hunting file, because I want to know if I gave you a report back that said, yes, this file is malicious, right? It hit 4 hosts, 2 had execution on them. What's the analyst to do? It's just going to make his ticket creation process for the IT support guys a whole lot faster. Matter of fact, it's, yes, sir, I want to create tickets for reimage. Send that off to your wonderful remedy system or your ServiceNow environment and let them go take care of that. Now, do I consider that a best practice? No, but I can automate and I can make it more effective. Meanwhile, they're going back and rescoping and handing that up to the level 2s to rescope to see if we missed an additional email that may have came under a different subject, or maybe it came from a different sender, right? Which is that whole Lockheed Martin intelligence-driven cyber defense thought process around how do I scope an environment. So these are some of the commonality playbooks that we talk about, right? Whether it's ingestion, investigation, containment, notify, and document. And we generally lead in with the customers with these because you're going to go and do file analysis the same. So why don't we build utility playbooks that go down this road, that start going down that process, looking at the logins, processing when's the last time they changed their password, force them to change their password again, notify them via email or notify them via instant message or SMS, right? Go ahead and document and create and update tickets automatically, right? Give the analyst a toolbox and to pull military parlance, a common operating picture to push information back and forth so they can see those different things. The problem with that common operating pictures is a lot of data. And those of you that have started your journey down the SOAR platform, you're going to find sexy, clean, different tools going out there. Just remember, where do you get access to all the data? How do you tie all that data together, right? Give you an example of what we did and how we do it differently is I had a company when I first started, and we were working with them. A large organization had 5 dedicated engineers doing their piece, 7 months of development, 20 events a day was their processing, automated. I took that same exact process, and in 4 weeks, with some help of some friends, 200 events a day without question. That's the change in development. And my use cases were fully documented. So we're going to walk down really quickly through the file analysis playbook, and I'm going to show you how I put all this together. Right? So you start out with your basic input, receive a hash or a file. You have your interactions and you have your artifacts. I add artifacts as a basis. How many, and by show of hands, how many people think the input's the most important thing? I got 1, 2. How many people think the interactions are most important? 2. Okay, that gives me, how many people think the artifacts are the most important? 2, 3, maybe 4. I would go with artifacts. And the reason being is because how do you make a decision in action? You need to have an artifact to make that decision in action. So you need to come up with what's that decision action process that you're going to go through, right? So you prioritize that decision action process into 3 basic components, right? What's the most likely course of action? What's the most obvious course of action? And what's the least likely course of action, right? Because you want to be able to go through and analyze, prompt, and block that malware right out of the gate. I don't need the analyst involved in the process. You want to tie that into what interactions are going to be able to give you that capability. What tools do you have in your environment? And then you start brainstorming this process and start pulling in all the actions that you're going to do. Block file, get reputation domain, block URL. And then you tie that into all the rest of them that you can pull in. Get approvals, hunt, all these actions. From there, you take one more step. You look at those common playbooks and you start documenting which actions go where. And now you can see that I can tie all these particular playbooks. And this gives me the framework to put together. Now, please don't go through the effort of making these PowerPoint slides. They're a waste of time. They look cool, and they're great for Crayola, management by Crayola, if those of you that have those people. They look great, but don't do it, right? Get your team, do a whiteboard exercise, get it done in an hour, and you take a picture with Microsoft Lens and be done with it, right? Show this through another process, throw this through action. Hopefully you started to understand some of the things that we have here, understanding the difference between SOEL and SOAR, Security Operations Event Lifecycle, and how that plays into SOAR, and what's the differences to SOAR when we start talking them. And then how to use SOEL to go in after your SOAR environment and make it effective. Thank you. Have a great day.
Great.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Appreciate it.